All right, welcome everyone. I'm Katie Freeman, and on behalf of Mystery Writers of America, welcome to the 70th Annual Edgar Award Symposiums. Tonight's discussion is with the nominees for Best First Novel by an American Author. Congratulations to all of our nominees. And our moderator tonight is Henry Hunsicker, and I'll be introducing him in a minute. You can learn more about Mystery Writers of America and the Edgar Awards by following us on social media using the hashtag Edgars2024 and by visiting the websites mysterywriters.org and edgarawards.com. A reminder that the Edgar Awards will be live streamed on our YouTube channel on May 1st, which may be where you're watching this as well. And during tonight's discussion, I'll be posting links to our panelists' books in the chat. Our featured bookstore today is Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas. Please feel free and extremely welcome to submit questions in the Q&A box throughout the conversation, and we'll get to them towards the end of the hour. And now to introduce our moderator. Harry Hunsicker is the best-selling author of 9 mysteries, including the forthcoming The Life and Death of Rose Duchette, which is coming in October, so you can pre-order it now. He's also written numerous short stories, as well as a recently produced short screenplay, which has received numerous accolades. His work has been shortlisted for both the Shamus and Thriller Awards. He's a longtime member of the Mystery Writers of America, and Hunsicker has served on the board of the organization, including a stint as executive vice president. He lives in Dallas. And Harry, turning it over to you.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you everybody for being here. Thank you to all our nominees and to everyone who is attending out there in Zoom land, wherever you may be. I appreciate everybody being here. This is a wonderful thing we're doing. I am truly honored to be moderating this panel, as well as having served as a judge for the Best First Novel Edgar Committee. As Katie said, I've been privileged enough to serve on the national board of MWA twice, or as I like to say, 2 tours of duty. And the heart of the organization, the brand, if you will, in my opinion, is the Edgar Award. And again, in my opinion, the most important Edgar Award is the one for Best First Novel, which is what we're celebrating tonight. It's an acknowledgement of the importance of continuing the tradition of writing great mysteries and of honoring new writers. To all our attendees, who are not nominees, to all our attendees, if you've not done so, please consider buying a copy of each nominee's book. Every one of these novels is a wonderful read, and by buying a copy, you are supporting the authors. If you can, please buy from an indie bookstore. I believe we have a link somewhere in the chat to our Murder by the Book in Houston, which is I'm in Dallas, but I consider that my local independent mystery bookstore. So please support indies whenever you can. I am going to introduce our authors, our panel tonight, and then I'm going to start asking some questions, and we're going to get a conversation going, and we're going to have a good time. I.S. Berry, also known as Elena, is the author. Ilana. Thank you for correcting me. I knew I was going to get that, but I got that out of the way.
Everyone gets it wrong. No worries.
Is the author of The Peacock and the Sparrow. She spent 6 years as an operation officer for the CIA, serving in wartime Baghdad and elsewhere. She has lived and worked throughout Europe and the Middle East, including 2 years in Bahrain during the Arab Spring. She is a graduate of the University of Virginia School of Law and Haverford College. She was raised in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and she lives in Virginia with her husband and son. Amy Chua is the John M. Duff Jr. Professor of Law at Yale Law School. She graduated from Harvard College and Harvard Law School, where she was executive editor of the Harvard Law Review. After practicing on Wall Street, she joined the Yale Law School faculty in 2001 and is a noted expert in the areas of foreign policy, globalization, and ethnic conflict. Amy is the best-selling author of numerous books, including The World on Fire, How Exporting Free Market Democracy Breeds Ethnic Hatred and Global Instability, Day of Empire, How Hyperpowers Rise to Global Dominance and Why They Fall, The Triple Package, How 3 Unlikely Traits Explain the Rise and Fall of Cultural Groups in America, and Political Tribes, Group Instinct, and the Fate of Nations. Her 2011 memoir, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mom, was a runaway international bestseller and has been translated into 30 languages. Amy published her debut novel, The Golden Gate, with Minotaur St. Martin's Press in September 2023. Ken Jaworowski, author of Small Town Sins, is an editor for the New York Times. He's a former amateur boxer and a graduate of Shippensburg University and the University of Pennsylvania. His plays have been produced in New York, London, and Paris. A Philadelphia native, he now lives in New Jersey with his family. Kristen Loesch grew up in San Francisco. She holds a BA in history as well as a master's degree in Slavonic studies from the University of Cambridge. Her debut historical novel, The Last Russian Doll, is published or forthcoming in 11 territories. And last but certainly not least is Ritu Mukerji, who was born in Calcutta, India, and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. From a young age, she has been an avid reader of mysteries, from Golden Age crime fiction to police procedurals, and the novels of P.D. James and Ruth Rendell. She received a BA in history from Columbia University and a medical degree from Sidney Kimmel Medical College of Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. She completed residency training at the University of California, Davis, and has been a practicing internist for 15 years. She lives in Marin County, California, with her husband and 3 children. And I'm impressed with these wonderful resumes, how you guys find time to write books. But welcome to you and to everyone who's listening in. And I'm just going to start right now, and I'm going to throw it open to whoever wants to go first. Where were you when you first heard that you were nominated for an Edgar, and how did you react? And how did you celebrate? Whoever wants to go.
I'll go.
All right.
Yeah, I had no idea. I had a writer friend, E.A. Amar. I don't know if anyone knows him. He's a great thriller writer, but he texted me, Ilana, congratulations. And I had no idea what he was talking about. And apparently the newsletter gets sent out, I don't know, in waves or staggered. So he had gotten it and I hadn't, and I had no idea. And but I looked it up. I still hadn't gotten the newsletter, and I was incredibly honored and excited.
This is Amy. I had a very similar experience. I was holding office hours with my students. You know, I meet with them for 20 minutes and we talk about their papers. And I was kind of bored between 2 of them. And I just quickly checked, you know, my text and my Twitter and heard about this thing. Same thing. Congratulations. First, I thought it was a mistake. I also didn't exactly know what it was. I actually thought it was impossible and was super excited. And then after that, meeting with all the students, I was completely distracted, could not concentrate on anything they were saying. I just kept wanting to find out more about this. So it was a fun day.
I have a couple of friends who do nothing but goof me via email, and I was certain that it was one of them. Then I emailed my agent, and his first response was, "I hope you have a tuxedo." I'm like, "No, I'm asking if this is real." He said it was real. My wife was pulling out of the driveway. I opened up the window to scream at her, and I went hoarse for a second. I'm like, "Wait, I have to check this again." And then she called me later and said, "I heard the news. Why didn't you tell me?" And I almost had screamed at her, but it was real, and I was very happy.
I'm happy. Oh, go ahead, Ritu.
Thank you. I was getting off a plane. Actually, I was on my way to India for my aunt's 90th birthday, and I had not been there in more than 5 years since before the pandemic. So for almost like 36 hours, I was unreachable. And I got off the plane and then activated WhatsApp, and there were just all these messages from my editor and agent, like, "Where are you? You know, you won't believe what happened." And so I was alone in an airport. The news. I was jumping up and down, and I'm sure everyone thought, what is wrong with her? But I was so thrilled and honored.
Oh, these stories are so lovely. I got tagged by Mystery Writers of America in an Instagram post, and I saw the post and I was like, huh, that person has my name and my book title. Something's weird. I was with all 3 of my kids at the time. So I was like, okay, deal with this later. I have to go back to parenting. And then I did go back later and I was like, either they've made a horrific mistake or this is real. So probably time to check in about it. But yeah, elated to find out.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So this is for everyone. Like many readers of fiction, one of the things I like best about reading a novel, and I'm sure that all of you are the same way, and a lot of our listeners are the same way too. One of the things I really enjoy is the sense that I am visiting a different place, and sometimes a different time, all without leaving my house. So, in looking back at our list of books, at your list, at the books you all have written, I am struck by how masterfully each one of you handled the sense of place, the setting, which ranged from the Rust Belt, Pennsylvania, to Philadelphia in the latter part of the 19th century, to the Bay Area in the 1940s, to pre and post-revolutionary Russia, into the Middle Eastern and Arab Spring. So let's just start. I'm going to go in order here of what you appear on my screen. Let's start with you, Ritu. And this question is for all of you. Tell us how setting has informed your storytelling.
Oh, I think that was almost, one of the most important elements. I first had the idea that I wanted to write a story about a woman doctor. And then I decided, because of, the existence of this historic medical college, that I would set the book in 1875 Philadelphia. And I had this character in mind, but even before I structured the story or the narrative, I really was into what I called world creation, 19th century Philadelphia, and then 19th century medicine, 10 years after the end of the Civil War. And so it really required just a lot of, extensive research, reading old medical textbooks, histories of Philadelphia, poring over old maps. And so it was a real immersion for me. And I think it was so important because, I love to read historical fiction, historical mysteries, historical fiction. And I think the detail is so very important. I mean, particularly for Philadelphia, that very atmospheric feeling of like walking down those narrow cobblestone streets and, kind of the slick from the rain and the gaslight and all of that. So it just required a huge amount of reading and really world construction before anything about the story, took shape.
Interesting. All right, Ken, you're next up on my screen.
I grew up in a rather small world, and that seems funny when I tell you I was from Philadelphia, but I grew up in the Roxbury section of Philadelphia and barely ever left it until I was 18. I think we went to the Jersey Shore a few times, but I had never left the city. I was going to say a street kid. I was, but I spent a lot of times on the streets in the Roxbury section. Then I left for college, and I went to a little college in Pennsylvania called Shippensburg. And the first morning I was woken up by a sound, and I was, what is that sound outside? I hear something. What was it? It was the clip-clopping of the Amish going down the street. And I was blown away. I said, I grew up right off of Ridge Avenue, which is one of the busiest streets in Philadelphia. And there I was, the Amish were going down the street. It was a total new world for me. It was not even roughly 2 hours away from Philadelphia, but it was a life-changing experience. And I said, I'm going to write about this area one day. I got out of college. I went even bigger. I went to Manhattan and completely forgot about the small town. My daughter decided to go to college, and we wanted to take a tour of Pennsylvania, and we stopped at all the small colleges, and it all came rushing back. And I said, that's it. I have to go back and write it and set it here. And that's what happened.
Right. Kristen.
Yeah, to carry on with what they were saying, I love historical fiction, particularly because of how immersive it is. I love to be transported, and I love the kind of the detail and the scene setting and the intricacies of, just feeling like you can travel to some other place without actually leaving your sofa, which appeals to me personally a great deal. And I always knew that I wanted to write about Russia. So for me, the setting came first. That was kind of the basis of the book to begin with, and everything else came after, but definitely, therefore, one of the most important elements.
Right. Ilana.
Yeah, so my book is set in Bahrain during the Arab Spring, where I lived for 2 years, same 2 years during which my book takes place. And it was crucial for my book. And I really sought to make Bahrain almost a character in the book. It's as changing and evolving, I thought, as a human. So I tried to make it as vivid and lifelike as any of the human characters. And for me, I was a spy for 6 years, and kind of the point of my book was about the murk of espionage, and how there's no clear right side and there's no clear right and wrong. And the Arab Spring to me was sort of the perfect prism for that, because it's a really, particularly in Bahrain, it's a really complex conflict. It's almost a proxy war. You have Saudi Arabia backing the monarchy and Iran to some degree backing the revolutionaries. And that was all sort of integral to to the crux of my story. So I felt like I really had to make Bahrain and the Arab Spring just come alive.
Right. Amy.
So my book is set in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is where I grew up. I actually, grew up in a not very nice town called El Cerrito, which is like a satellite of Berkeley. But my parents are immigrants, and following the kind of usual immigrant American dream trajectory, after I went to college, they moved to a way nicer house up in the Berkeley Hills. And it turns out that my parents, they're 87 right now. They currently live in Madame Chiang Kai-shek's former house in Berkeley. For reasons nobody knows, Madame Chiang Kai-shek, who was the first lady of China, lived by herself in Berkeley, California from 1943 to 1944. And you can still see bars on my parents' house, like iron bars. And the ostensible reason for why the first lady of China was in Berkeley in the middle of the Second World War was that a dermatologist. But it turns out there were rumors that she was having an affair. So I spun this whole story out of this weird historical fact. And setting was really important for me. It was very similar to the other authors. I was at once very familiar with it because this is where I grew up. But I also realized that sometimes when you grow up in a place, you can be incredibly ignorant about it. You just take everything for granted. And I had no idea that during the Second World War, that San Francisco Bay Area became the largest shipbuilding center in the history of the world. It later made sense. It's like all these signs, Naval Shipyard, Kaiser Shipyard. But as a kid growing up, I was like, who cares, So, and then just about a block from my parents' house is this place called the Claremont Hotel. I've never stayed there, but it's stunning and beautiful. And it turns out that there is a real life ghost story associated with that. In the 1930s, a little girl was found dead in the laundry chute, and her ghost is said to haunt the Claremont still. You can go there, people still talk about it. So I kind of wove that whole thing, as the background for the book.
Right, very interesting. So this is for all of you, and I'll just gonna start picking people at random. I always have a certain feeling, but I don't want to say what it is, but I'm going to ask you this question. When you finished writing your book, let's say the first draft or any draft, but let's say the first draft, when you finally typed the end, what did you feel? Were you sad to let the characters go? Let's go with, let's start with you, Kristen.
Okay, well, when I finished the very first draft of this novel, I was like, yay, I'm completely done. This is it. I've reached the end of the road. It's perfect. It's the best it's ever going to be. I've now rewritten it about 5 or 6 times, and I will never, ever be able to capture that feeling again, I think. But definitely, as you say, there was a sense of loss as well as the utter triumph that was ultimately so fleeting. There was definitely the sense that these characters had become real people to me, that I had spent so much time with them, that they were taking up so much headspace, and I had wild thoughts like, should this be a sequel? Should this be a trilogy? Should I, somehow keep these people alive forever? That is not going to happen, but I definitely remember those odd feelings and thoughts coming up when you type the end.
Ritu, what about you?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Honestly, I wrote this book, probably the first draft, over a few years while I was working as a doctor. And so these characters truly became like old friends that are living in my head. And certainly now more time has passed. And I've grown very attached to them, not just the main character, but some like the police sergeant and, some of Lydia's colleagues at the medical school. And so I actually always envisioned it, though, as an ongoing, like a series. And I'm working on the second book right now. So it makes me feel very, very happy that we're continuing our journey together. But there were certain characters from the first book that I honestly, a couple of the villains were hard to let go of too, because, I felt like I had examined them so deeply. I've really delved into like the psychology of their character that it was almost a little sad to let them go.
Amy, what about you?
My story is very similar to Kristen's. When I finished it, I was just triumphant. I was like, oh my gosh, I did it. It's perfect. It's so clever. Can't wait to have this out. I had a very, very active hands-on agent. She's fantastic. So I thought she was gonna love it too, but I got this major comment letter with all these changes that need to happen. And I'm a very type A personality, you know, so I got these comments and I just like worked really, really hard and, you know, turned it around. 1 month later, sent it back. And then I didn't hear from her for like a long, long time. And I finally called her. I was like, hey, Teresa, just wondering, you know, what you thought. And I swear to God, I mean, she's a really good friend and she's amazing, but she's really direct. She said, well, my team and I, we read your revisions and we all agree that you've made it worse.
Oh, no.
She's like, you're very type A. This is not like nonfiction. You don't just, because our comments where we wanted you to deepen the characters and become more intimate and really struggle. And then she said, and this was torture for a type A person. She said, I'm going to give you more comments, but I am not going to read anything from you for another 6 months. And this was like killed me. I thought we were going to publish this immediately. But she was totally right. She asked me to go read. She said, read other mysteries. I'm going to read everybody on this Zoom meeting now. But it really improved. It really helped me just to slow down. So that was kind of my story.
Ilana, did I ask you already? I'm sorry.
You did not. No, I don't think I felt a sense of loss. I think I felt relief that I was done. My situation was a little strange because I have a secrecy obligation with the agency where I couldn't show my manuscript to anyone until I had it approved. So I literally worked in a vacuum for 5 years. So when I finished my manuscript, I mean, that's how long it took me to write and edit everything. So when I finally finished my manuscript, my first thought was, you know, great, now I can submit it for approval and actually show it to people. So in a way, it felt like a release, like now I can actually get this out in the world and get feedback on it. You know, maybe I just spent the last 5 years of my life, maybe I just wasted the last 5 years of my life with the worst book ever. So it was kind of a relief to be able to actually submit it and show it to people.
So no writers group? Or no?
Oh no! I mean, it's almost impossible if you worked for the agency and signed a secret. I mean, you could. There are people who are in these writers groups. I mean, it's a little bit loosey-goosey. It's a little bit gray, but technically, you're not supposed to show anyone. Like, no, not an agent, not an editor, not your spouse, no one.
Interesting. What about you,
yeah.
Ken?
Tolstoy said, "A work is never complete; it's only abandoned." And boy, have I found that to be the truth. I will not let anything go. If there's a sentence I could rewrite, or if there's a sentence, something I could sharpen, or a situation. So when I finished, I realized, and I'm an editor by trade too. So when I finished, I remember back to the beginning. Let's read it over and let's see how sharp we can get. Let's see how strong we can get. So there was no sense. The only sense I got, again, is from back to Tolstoy, is I had to abandon it and I had to send it in. As for the characters, there's 3 main characters in the book, and it switches perspectives from each of them. And all 3 were based on real people and real situations. And I get to watch those people still and see how they evolved. And I hope to revisit the characters again. And since I'm being very literary, starting off with Tolstoy, I'm going to have to paraphrase Hemingway, who said something like, "It's all in the rewrite." It really is. And for me, that's the truth. Some people seem to want to finish and move on. Me, it's all about the rewrite.
Right. Yes, I think writing is rewriting, as they say,
Yeah,
as the old chestnut goes. Yes. So this is for anyone. These are all questions for anyone. I don't know why I'm saying that. What is something that you learned while writing your book that surprised you? And that could be about the story, or about a certain aspect you learned about the publishing industry, anything. But what's something that you learned while you were writing your book that surprised you? And I'm not going to pick anybody, just somebody jump in and we'll get to everybody. Or you can pass if you want to.
I'll say, because I think other authors will agree with me, that I was surprised how much authors are supposed to do, like in terms of marketing, and I didn't realize so much would be on authors. That was a little of a surprise to me.
Who
I
else?
thought much the same. I thought, oh, I'm done. My job is done. No, my job, in a sense, just began. And so I that was the biggest surprise to me. I thought I would be J.D. Salinger, submit the book and go hide away. And I'm not hiding from anybody.
I was surprised during the drafting process by how much did not kind of go according to how I thought it would. So I'm not really a very strict planner in terms of plot, although I aspire to be, based on my experience with The Last Russian Doll. But definitely as I was progressing through the story, there were moments when I was like, this is where I thought this plot line was going to go, or this is how I thought this story would end up. And it turns out that that's not going to work at all for reasons that I can't actually articulate. It just doesn't either work for the character, or something is different than how I thought it would be. And so the drafting process turned into a real process of discovery, and it just turned out different than I thought it would.
I was just amazed at how long the process is from, acquisition of the book by an editor, and then the in-house, the copy edit, and, an additional revision, and going through, the cover design, and all of these elements that seem to have so many steps, and just the level of detail and care that goes into it. Now I walk around a bookstore and I just look at some random books sitting and just have this deep appreciation for everything that's gone into it that I really didn't understand before.
I'm always amazed by the copy edit. Sorry, go ahead.
For me, a big really difficulty was the transition from writing nonfiction. I've written a bunch of nonfiction books to fiction, and I had a lot of trouble with too many perspectives, multiple voices. And my editors kept saying this, but I didn't really understand what they were talking about. And I also, I had this kind of nonfiction. So the historical fiction part was similar. There's research, but I almost used that as a crutch. So I found that for me, it was one of the best things, but also hardest things was learning to kind of just let myself go and not be like so footnote oriented and specific, fact oriented. And it was definitely a struggle for me. I'd like to try again, and, with a kind of different mindset, just like, let your creativity go as opposed to document everything and have everything be precise. So that was one of my, learning curves.
I struggled with that as well. And I think maybe historical fiction writers tend to struggle with that a bit more. I don't know. But that was definitely my experience as well.
That's true. Like how to keep the narrative going and create the suspense and layer in the red herrings without getting bogged down. I found that too, just getting really bogged down. No, wait, I really want to describe fully this, hospital in Philadelphia in 1875. No, it's too much sometimes. Yeah.
Well, that's a nice segue into the question I was going to ask next, which we've touched on just a little bit just then, and then with other question. Our other discussion about setting, but let's talk about research. I'd just like to know this. I'm sure the listeners would, but me personally, I'd like to know what your research process was. Each one of you. For some of you, the historical aspects of some of your books were just amazing, the details, but still there was so many layers in each of your books, and this gets back to the sense of place. But I'd like to know what you did, what your research process is like, and how far you went, and just discuss each one of you, if you could, a little bit about your research process.
For me, the research is a great way to procrastinate and not have to write. So I got every biography of Madame Chiang Kai-shek. I have all these history books of the San Francisco Bay Area. A lot of it was wasted. I read a book about the entire wine country. I wrote a section, but like Ritu said, my editor cut it. It's like too much detail. I read entire firsthand accounts of the building of the Golden Gate Bridge. So interesting, just like interviews with the workers. And it was that part was really fun because I'm used to it from being an academic. Then I made charts and, quotes. And again, I think for me, it was all that part was really fun because I felt like I was working, but it was really just procrastination, which is like, you know, I have all of these index cards and all these quotes. But that part was came naturally to me, and it was in a way kind of distilling it into something more readable. That was the challenge.
Who else wants to talk about research?
I didn't do a lot of research about Bahrain and the Arab Spring just because I had lived there. So a lot of it, I started writing not long after I got back from Bahrain. So it was pretty fresh in my mind. And about a third of my book takes place in Cambodia, where I'd also been, and I kind of drew from my own experiences. The stuff I had to research, a lot of the more technical questions, like what quantity of explosives would knock out a destroyer, things like that. I went to a high school that specialized in math and science, so we have a Facebook group online, and so a lot of tech people. So I would go online and ask them these tech questions about explosives and stuff, and people would say, you might not want to type that on the internet. You might attract the attention of law enforcement. But it was actually really helpful.
That does remind me, I didn't, even though I know about criminal law, I was very ignorant about where bullets go and what things look like, kind of the forensics. So I did have to research that too, just get kind of, and I'm really bad with physics. So, which way does the bullet have to come?
I've been looked at.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, please, after you.
Sure. I was just going to say that I find it so easy to disappear down research rabbit holes as well. That's definitely a weakness and something I've had to actively curb in order to get any writing done. In my case, I kind of drew a lot from my academic background and my master's degree, my postgrad research. But I think that I thought I knew more than I did. So when I started researching, I was like, I've forgotten pretty much a great deal beyond the basics of what I studied. So I had to kind of work from the beginning again. And that was a wonderful process, actually. I sort of fell in love with that body of research, that body of literature all over again, and really enjoyed it. But again, the rabbit holes, they will get you.
I would love to take the internet off my computer, because man, that is the place to go for rabbit holes. I've been looked at sideways at several readings because people wonder how I wrote about a heroin addict. And one of the characters is a former heroin and an opioid. He was addicted, and people had asked, how did I was grateful that they thought I captured it very realistically. I was working on a series for the Times. I was not writing it. I was editing a series for the Time on opioid addiction. So I got a lot of my research done there on the job. And also I had to, you could research this all, but you sort of have to have the human side of it too. And it forced me to look inside myself. I've never been addicted to anything, but there's times when I say, hey, you shouldn't have that extra drink. You should maybe, occasionally I'll have a cigar. I'm like, maybe you shouldn't have that. And so you have to look deep inside yourself. And I'm sure all of us have done this about the character and examine their motivations. And even if you don't have that addiction, even if you don't have that motivation, you have something in you that identifies with that character. So I had to sit down, and I spent a lot of time, sort of, for lack of a better term, staring at the wall, thinking, how would that be if I was addicted to this substance? And then following it up with a lot of research. I hate to extol the Times, but I love the New York Times. I've worked there for 19 years, and we've done an extensive series on opioid addictions, which really helped me in the research.
Great. So everybody answered that, right?
Oh, wait, sorry, I'm the last one to go. I would just say, I took a fascinating deep dive into the world of 19th century medicine and the somewhat unregulated freewheeling world of 19th century medicine. And that was so interesting to go back to, as a modern day doctor, used to sophisticated imaging and technology, and just go back to this world. that felt so rudimentary. And even just in terms of language or what it would look like or feel like to examine a patient. And there are a lot of scenes in the book where I was, really had to go back and look at old textbooks and medical journals. And then to kind of create the world of this medical college, Drexel University in Philadelphia has an incredible archive of like books and papers and diaries of these, pioneering women doctors. And it was such fun to go and kind of, put on the gloves and carefully turn the pages that are kind of crumbling, into little bits. But it truly is, I think, one of the most fun parts about writing.
So let's talk about one of my least favorite parts of writing. How hard was it for each of you to come up with a title for your book?
Oh,
I got a reaction over there. Okay.
from me. I'm gonna have to be honest. I had the worst title, and I'm going to tell you what it was. It was so pretentious and it was so terrible that I groan when I think of it, and I groan thinking how sure I was that this was the title. And the title was, and I have to admit it since I've gone into it, was The Second Girl I Ever Kissed. And I remember my agents like, yeah, we like the book, but boy, we don't like that title. It was something, it was a line from what a character had said. And I thought it was so beautiful. And he's like, yeah, but not for this novel. It's beautiful for another novel. And then I went with Small Town, and we batted back and forth over a couple of days, and we sort of brainstormed, and I can't even remember who got Sins, but we stopped on Small Town Sins. But God, it was so. I'm very interested in how all the rest, because I love all your titles too. So I'm interested in how everybody else went. But it was a brainstorming session.
Well,
I had like
so interesting. I actually had a very similar story because there's this theme of Victorian poetry that's really central to the plot of the book. And so I read a lot of poetry, and I really wanted the title to be from my favorite poet, Emily Dickinson, who was not publishing in the US at the time the book was written. So I knew it had to be the title or the epigraph for the book. So many things changed about the book, over time, but I had it in my head, this one little excerpt, and it was going to be called The Bones Obligation. And I loved that title so much. And it was from an Emily Dickinson poem. And my editor's like, no. Who wants to read about an obligation? Is the book about someone named Bone? It doesn't make any sense. So that was like a back to the drawing board. We were, scouring like Oxford Anthology of Poetry, coming up with all these alternate titles. And then it worked out beautifully because it ended up being from an Emily Dickinson poem. And it kind of has a multi-layered, meaning to what happens in the book. But it was a process for sure.
I had a bunch of titles that I really liked. And funny story, I had a different title to begin with. We all liked it, my editor, everyone. And then someone else in my publishing company happened to come out with a book just a couple months before mine with exactly the same title. So so I had to switch titles. Luckily, I had this backup, The Peacock and the Sparrow, which I ended up in the end liking actually more than my original. I feel like it fit the story better. So it's a reference to a parable in 1001 Arabian Nights. So I think it ended up working out.
I was just like, when Harry said it's my least favorite thing, I'm just awful at this, awful. And it's always my least favorite part. Completely, I'm usually a pretty, I think, creative person, but completely unimaginative when it comes to these titles. Death at the Claremont. I mean, I just couldn't. And it was my agent actually who just thought, my book has a lot to do with kind of the immigrant experience, and I just didn't have the creativity. She thought that the Golden Gate, it wasn't just the Golden Gate Bridge, but also symbolized, kind of like the New World. So she came up with that. But similar to Ken's story, this is by about terrible titles. It was actually the book that I'm notorious for, the Tiger Mom book. I had the worst title ever. It's now they made it Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, which I really like. But when I went out with it, it was called Dog Raising by a Chinese Mother.
Okay.
Horrible.
I guess that leaves me, but all your stories are so good. Mine feels very tame by comparison. And like Amy, I also feel that I'm really bad at titles, and I wonder if it's become somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because now whenever I'm, tasked to come up with a title or start to think about titles, I'm kind of gripped by fear, which probably doesn't help the creative flow. But in my case, the book came out in the UK first, the year before in 2022, under a different title, The Porcelain Doll, which was chosen by my UK editor. At the time, I did not know how much power editors have over book titles. So that's something that I learned over the course of this publishing process. But here in the US, I talked about it with my editor here, and we thought we wanted to try something different, and she came up with it. I mean, she was just brilliant. She had a list, and I looked at it, I was like, well, these are all better than anything I could have come up with. So we agreed on The Last Russian Doll, and I love it. And I love all of your titles as well. They're wonderful.
Did everyone answer that? I need to keep notes, and I'm not. My bad. Everybody got to that. So this would not be a book panel if we didn't ask this one. So this is again one that I always like to hear about other writers. But what's your writing process like? Are you guys out? Do you outline or do you not outline? And kind of a follow up with that to include with that. Do you have any rituals related to writing?
I don't outline.
Oh, you go.
So I was just saying, I don't outline. I have kind of a general idea of where I want the story to go, the beginning and the end, and I don't necessarily know all the in between. I kind of just figure it out along the way. And I try to get out of the house when I write. The Peacock and the Sparrow, I wrote entirely at my local Starbucks. I just would sit there every day, and I got to know the baristas, and they became my biggest cheerleaders, and they're wonderful. And I listen to music, and sometimes this is weird. I listen to the same song over and over and over and over again. I know it's like weird, but when I'm
an outliner, but related to that, I have terrible writer's block. But I always tell my students this. I've always had writer's block when I stare at a screen. If I were in a Starbucks, I would not be able to do anything. So a lot of my passages are when I'm running my dogs or I'm walking, and it's kind of like the whole, like, entire passages or dialogues will come to my head. And people will think I'm a crazy person because I have these two big white dogs. I'll stop, I'll step on the leashes, and I'll take out my phone and like type in all this stuff. And some of my favorite passages are from these spontaneous things that come into my head. And I know, like, I'm so old now, if I don't write it down, I'll forget the words. So I'm constantly stopping, like in the middle of the sidewalk, and just doing these weird things. But that's, otherwise I actually find it very painful to write.
I just wanted to say that, Alana, I do the same thing. I listen to the same piece of music over and over, and my husband will overhear it. My kids will overhear it. They'll be totally sick of it. But it has this weird, I'm really happy to hear you say that now.
Me too. Yeah. I'm shocked. That's amazing.
And it has this interesting effect on me now that if I hear that piece of music, I start to sink into the world of my book. So it was like a fast tracking to kind of becoming immersed in the manuscript, because often it takes a bit of time otherwise to get warmed up, especially when you take out your laptop or your notebook and you're kind of like, and now it all starts. But then the piece of music kind of eases you into it, or at least that's been my experience. So yay, that's awesome.
I love that.
Amazing.
I'm really a plotter for sure. Even though everything in the middle might change multiple times, I really have to have a little roadmap for where I'm going. But I have I think a very simple routine. I just like to write really early in the morning or late at night. And I've really kept to that no matter what else is going on, because the house is quiet. And really all I need is just strong Peet's coffee. That's it.
Same thing on the coffee. I need a lot of it. And this is the first time I did write with an outline, and I think it saved me. Like everybody else, I think I have 2 or 3 or 4 novels sitting in a collecting dust where they should be. A lot of failed attempts in the past, and this time I said to myself, no, let's plot it out a little bit better. And that's what I did. I think it saved me.
That's what I hope to do in going forward is to plot out as much as I can. That's my hope.
Makes it easier sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. So, well, continuing with that, did you all? It's writing a book's hard. It's a hard thing to do. Did anybody ever think about quitting? I mean, like in the middle, go like, I just don't know if I can do it, or did you just power through? You know, like what challenges did you really face? And if you did, how did you overcome them?
That is such a great question. I don't think I've ever been asked that question about whether I thought about quitting. And the answer is, in this case, I had decided to take it as far as I could possibly go before my kids. I guess by the time my kids became of school age and were off at school, if nothing had come of it, I probably would have pivoted. But I knew that I had to put several years probably of work into it. And I knew that there was going to be a lot of rejection and that there were going to be a lot of moments of feeling like I'm not good enough at this. This is statistically too difficult, just a lot of self-defeating narratives going on, I think. But luckily I found a lot of other writers to connect with. And I think that made a big difference to me in terms of getting through that.
Anybody else?
I feel like at least for myself, I don't know. There were moments when I hated my story. I feel like every writer feels like that. Like one day you love it, and the next day there were moments for me where I was like, "What am I thinking? This is the worst story ever." And to me, I liken it to like a relationship with a person or a spouse, where it's like you love the person, but sometimes you don't like the person. Sometimes you fight with the person. Sometimes you feel like you don't want to see the person, but at the end of the day, you still love them. So I don't know. I feel like that's, if you have a story you love, it can kind of get you through those bad moments where you hate it, you feel like it's going nowhere, but you fundamentally, you believe in the story.
I had come up with sort of the final twist. Like I didn't have any stuff in the middle, but I had the kind of bare bones of the plot, which is, it starts a grandmother from a wealthy San Francisco family is told that one of her 3 granddaughters is the murderer, but they don't know which one. And I knew the twist at the end. So I kind of was excited about that. But like everybody else, oh my God, there were just times where I just got so sick of it, where I was like, this is not working. First of all, this is so complicated. It's out of control, or other times I would read dialogue that I'd written and be like, yuck, this is disgusting, and just like I need to start over, and so.
Anybody else?
I mean, I think it's such a hugely challenging process. And I think, as others have said, I think it's just going back to that story, and that for me, it was this world I had created. I didn't really work with a writing group. I was, writing this at odd hours of the day. I work as a doctor. And so there were moments of such self-doubt. And, I would put it away in total frustration. And then a couple of weeks later, I'd start thinking through the puzzle of how would I navigate that plot twist, or what would this character do in a certain situation? And then everything would come back out again, because it was kind of this wonderful creative outlet and this, almost like a feeling of creative play in this world I had created. And that would bring me back.
I wasn't going to give up on this novel, but I may have given up on writing novels. Again, I've written several in the past that are collecting dust, and I said to myself this time, okay, finish this, but maybe stop if you can't get this one published. And my agent said something like, after I said it to him, well, I got an agent, and I said it to him. And he says, I could sell this in 3 weeks. And I said, I've been waiting 20 years. You're not going to sell this in 3 weeks. And he lied. He sold it in 2 weeks and 6 days.
Wow.
And I could not believe it. And it has been since August the book came out. And I'm still, if I look like I have this perplexed look on my face constantly, it's because I still feel a little bit baffled after all this time.
It's really interesting. Anybody else on that? So we have a couple, we have a little less than 10 minutes ago. We have a couple questions from the audience. I thought, let's get to that. Is there any advice you got from a fellow writer that really meant a lot to you? Anybody want to ponder that one?
The reason I decided to write this book after many years, or write books after many years of not writing, was on a trip taking in the car with my family, and an interview came on the radio with Tamora Pierce, who is my favorite childhood author. And I was like, I remember loving her books, dreaming of being a writer, but that was a really long time ago. And now I have these babies and this whole other life. And in the interview, she talked about how she worked as a secretary by day and she would write at night. And something about the way she was speaking, or maybe because I remembered just loving her books so much, I was like, maybe I could try that. Maybe I could actually do it. And I was lucky enough that my husband encouraged me to do it, because there was obviously a lot of doubt and a lot of fear as well. But that was really a really transformative moment for me, because I just adored her books. And it makes you think about what a difference books make in people's lives, that, such an impression at such a young age. And then 20 years later, just listening to that author on the radio was just, life altering.
Anybody else? All right. Then here's a follow-up to that one, related question to that one. Has anybody heard from from writers since publishing your books? Is there some sort of response to your first book being published that you'll remember, as in hearing from a fellow author?
I think the process of, getting blurbs for the book was really, wonderful. That was another little education in and of itself, is, how to get those, who to ask for. But, it was very wonderful to have some writers that, really admired in the mystery genre and historical fiction, who, read the book and really enjoyed it. That was hugely gratifying to kind of get that first, almost like a little validation of what you've been doing. So that really felt great.
We had a slight mishap on the communication with the questions to me. That should have been, have you heard from any readers?
Oh.
Writers. That was a line of communication that got messed up there. So have you heard from any readers, but anything that meant something to you?
For me, for sure, the most meaningful readers are people who have been in war zones, or either as a spy or in the military, who've had to make kind of difficult decisions in this fog of war, this fog of espionage, who have reached out to me and said that my book kind of spoke to them, that it helped them, it resonated with them, and that means everything to me.
I remember hearing from just recently, a man who must be like 90 years old, and he loved the book, and he grew up in the Bay Area, and he was like, reading this book was surreal, because he would have been like the age of my protagonist, and he said it was exactly like this. I served in the war. This is the shipbuilding center. My house is on exactly where you described it. Everything is so accurate. It was like reading about my own life. So that was really amazing. We actually have plans to meet up with each other in the Bay Area sometime, because he just knew so much about what I had researched and learned, but he had lived through it, like 1,000 years ago. So that was a fun one to get.
Yeah, I think readers seek out books that are familiar with, or maybe familiar with them, or have settings or people. And I think my title catcher, you look at something small town, and I've had a lot of people from small town, especially since Pennsylvania is dotted with so many small towns, and they say the same thing. And so 2 or 3 of them said, I know this is my town and you changed the name, which is a completely, so that's great to hear, but it's a completely fictitious town.
I've also loved hearing from readers. That's been the favorite part of the author publishing experience for me, is hearing from readers. And there have been ones that are really, really touching. I've gotten messages from emigres from the Soviet Union, I've gotten messages from people who say the book reminds them of their parents, of their grandparents, of their childhoods, of things that they wish they had asked their parents and grandparents. And it's been really, really moving.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's just the best hearing from readers. And I love hearing, like, details from people in the medical profession or who had gone to this, whose grandmothers were doctors, or they'll just write in that they're really touched by something in the story. And then one thing I feel particular pride is, I really wanted to get the city of Philadelphia right, because I know how much Philadelphia natives love it. And so to get a letter or to hear from someone from Philadelphia saying you just got it right, it's wonderfully gratifying.
And speaking of that, we have a question for Amy specifically. Have you had any reaction from the Claremont Hotel?
Yes, actually, that's a great question. I could literally see the hotel from my parents' house. So, I kind of started, to be fair, like I kind of went to them and said, I'm writing this book, but they were really, really nice about it. And I think like put the book out, and then they gave me this private tour of all the secret parts of the hotel that are not open to the public anymore. And there are all these photos and everything. And I'm hoping maybe down the road to like do an event there or something. So yes, they've been great about it.
Can I just say that I grew up in San Francisco, and I've read your novel, Amy, and I loved it. And I'm half Chinese, so I spent a lot of time in Chinatown. I'm really interested in the history of Madame Chiang Kai-shek, all of it. I loved it. I just had to say,
no
had to
idea.
fangirl.
Oh my God, thank you. Well, I absolutely cannot read, really. Like, I can't wait to read every one of these books.
So we've got one more question, and then we're going to close. I want to remind everybody to join us this Saturday for a conversation with the nominees for the G.P. Putnam's and Sons Sue Grafton Memorial Award. You can find out more by visiting mysterywriters.org. And remember to tune into the live broadcast of the award ceremony on May 1st. So our last question is for everyone, who is your favorite? What's your favorite mystery? That's a big, broad one. I love that.
Favorite mystery, oh my God. For me, I think my instinctive, I mean, I've been so busy. When I was little, I had very strict parents, and I was a huge bookworm, would walk to the Elsinore Library, come back with my arms loaded full of just Agatha Christie books. And I read every single one of them. I don't even remember which one I liked best, but this Nemesis, as the name sticks out. I loved Rebecca when I was little by Daphne du Maurier. This is ages ago, but so those are the names that come to mind.
Anybody else have a favorite off the top of your head? That's a hard question. Like let me just spit that out. But
yeah, off the top of my head, he's in my mind because he did an interview this week, which I encourage everyone to read. I think it was with CBS. Caleb Carr, who wrote The Alienist, and which is I hope I didn't steal your title.
No, it's a great one though.
Oh, it is, but it's terrific. I encourage everyone to read it. Great for historical mysteries, and he has a new book out, and he's got some news which I don't want to give away. You could find it on the online, but just put Caleb Carr into Google, and I'm sure it'll come up. It's a 10-minute interview, and it's terrific. So The Alienist is a great book.
Great book. Yeah, I would choose, I love Henning Mankell, a Scandinavian author. He passed away a few years ago, but, we were talking about kind of place setting as almost as significant as a character, and his books are set in Malmo, Sweden. And, the landscape is so, kind of bleak, but starkly beautiful. And it really mirrors, kind of the inner life of Kurt Wallander, who's the inspector. The books are brilliant. They're so complex and deeply plotted. Highly recommend. Love those.
This is wonderful. I feel like I can really add to my TBR after this session. I'm going to go with Agatha Christie as well, probably, and then there were none. I feel like that's, especially because I've read a lot of books that use that as inspiration by now. I feel I must have read at least a dozen books that really draw from that. So it just shows how incredibly groundbreaking she was as an author. And a recent mystery that I really loved is another Edgar nominee, Bright Young Women, Jessica Knoll. Loved that one.
I would probably say, I don't know if this counts as a mystery, but my favorite book of any kind is Graham Greene, The Quiet American, which is sort of a mystery. So I think his prose is just amazing. It's a great book.
Well, I think we everybody answered that, right? I didn't keep notes on that one. All right. Well, listen, I think we're out of time. We're trying to keep this to an hour. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank all the attendees for taking their time to come and join us. This has been a wonderful experience. I hope I hope all the nominees are going to be at the Edgar ceremony on May 1st. And everyone can live stream it. There's a link on mysterywriters.org. But I want to thank everybody and thank Katie for kind of being behind the scenes and running everything. And I hope everybody has a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.